let's talk about the American Bulldogs history, both recorded and theory.
Yeah, I've thought about, from the minute I got interested in American Bulldogs, I was like, when I first got into it, the textbooks and a lot of the breeders, they all have the same kind of similar stories, and they were trying to convince people that the American Bulldog is the original bull baiting dog from England, and it came here with the Pilgrims and with all the people who brought bulldogs, which I'm sure some did, but for them to survive, being bred, and some of the blood survived for sure, but it wasn't I know there was no organized breeding, because there would have been something historically we could have found. So it gets kind of involved, in the history of all breeds of dogs. I think people need to stop and think about how many possibly thousands and thousands of years dogs have been working with humans. I think like I said one time before, I think that there's some study that says they found bones 30,000 years old of domesticated dogs. There's lots of them that have found them that are 10, 12,000, 9,000 years. Skulls in Siberia they found in a cave, I think, that was 8,000 years old. So if you think about even 8,000 years, and then of these dogs that were running around the woods with us, herding or tracking or catching game so we can eat, hunting with us as if they're in a wolf pack, but they're a hell of a lot more useful than humans are on two legs. So there's been, maybe not defined breeds, but there's been types of catch dogs, of gripping dogs, of tracking dogs, all the little things that a bulldog does, as a catch dog traditionally now. So those genetics, that blood has gone way, way back, way farther than anybody ever dreamed of a breed. So you got to think, we're like, especially the American Bulldog, like, they just started registering them in 1973, I think, or even in the late 60s, they started coming up with a name. Johnson came up with a name, and Scott came up with a name, and started gathering dogs of no pedigree to try to preserve the breed, which is cool. That's how everything was done. I mean, after World War II, they say that there was no English Mastiffs left in England. They had to kill them. They had to kill them all, or they exported them to the U.S., and they say that the breed got down to possibly 12 dogs. And so they had to recreate it by getting St. Bernard blood, or they called it Alpine Mastiff blood, and Great Dane blood, and they recreated the breed. So, but you don't walk around, and that wasn't thousands of years ago. That was, not that long ago. So people don't walk around with English Mastiffs and say, this is a mixed dog. They call it a purebred breed, which in every sense it is. It reproduces itself. So it's as pure as anything else. But that's how all breeds started. So when I talk about American Bulldog history and what I know and what I imagine or I hypothesize about, there could be blood from people bringing the bull baiting dog here in the 1600s. There could be blood from Christopher Columbus's war dogs, which were the Alans, that basically is the breed or the type of dog that I think almost all Mastiff and Bulldogs come from, and lots of other stuff, livestock guarding dogs, and probably a lot of hunting hounds. They came from that basic type of dog that were derived from this Alani tribe, which were kind of like nomadic people that lived in North Africa, and they were supposed to be the best horsemen, horse breeders, and they bred horses they could shoot arrows and white swords and kill people. And the dogs were kind of bred to be war dogs too. So Christopher Columbus, it's documented. There's artwork that shows what the dogs look like. Those dogs were here. And I'm sure, as they Spanish set up camps and forts all over Florida and into Louisiana and all that started coming into the country, the French were here too. That kind of a dog could have helped a lot of people. So I'm sure they bred those dogs, and there was a contingent, there. So I'm sure all that stuff factored into the American Bulldog. But and I'm sure when they were importing fighting dogs from Scotland and Ireland and England, what basically the family of type dogs that made up the pit bull today, there was offshoots from that. I believe the American Bulldog was an offshoot of that also. I think that the dogs that didn't test game enough, or maybe were too big and, not gamey enough for a pit fight, instead of knocking him in the head, they may have given it to George down the road that just wants a catch dog, or his son liked the dog and it's just a good farm dog and it's just their family dog. And I think that just became a tradition in the United States for these big bulldogs. And they were useful, so they were bred and used and kept. Maybe not the way we breed dogs today, but, they survived. And Johnson talks about, before the war, when he was a kid, there was much more of these dogs that people used on their farm and, had as catch dogs. And then when he came back from the war, they were hard to find, which happened to a lot of working dogs. When the Industrial Revolution came, people came off the farm and they moved to the cities. And so they're not bringing working dogs into the city. So when Johnson and Scott set out to preserve this breed of dog that they knew of as a tradition in the South that's been around for a long time, they just didn't have a name, and they weren't bred like purebred dogs were. There's no records kept, and there's no shows or any of that stuff. It was just, Billy Bob's got a heck of a bulldog. Maybe you want to fight him and see who's got the better dog, or let's go in the woods. This sucker can catch. He's a great catch dog. I put him in the back of the covered wagon, or I put him in the back of a Model T station wagon or whatever.
Right.
And they brag about how big he is, and it just became a tradition. And hillbilly ingenuity made some excellent dogs. Like Johnson had said in his interviews, it would have been awesome to preserve those dogs. I bet a lot of really good dogs died, never were bred or never were used on anything coordinated to make, a purebred strain or anything like that. So the American Bulldog just evolved. So in the late 60s, Alan Scott was a kid, and Johnson had raised Angus cattle on his property, and I guess he became friends with Alan Scott's uncle, I believe. And Alan was interested in the dogs. Johnson had these dogs. He didn't have them registered. He didn't, just call them bulldogs, I believe. And so when they kind of got together and set out to register the dogs and do all this stuff, basically they were hunting dogs down to, like, the foundation of the breed is a dog called Mac the Masher. There's only one picture of him. He looks kind of like an emaciated, blocky-headed pit bull. He had a big, wide muzzle and a big, wide head. And he was really old. They said he was like 13 years old or something when they took the picture. So he was not the dog he was when he was younger. And he got him from a guy called Sells Ashley, who was just a guy that had catch dogs. And he wouldn't ever sell the dog until he got really old. Finally, he sold him to Alan Scott. And Johnson bred a female to him, which it's funny, recently, I know Alan a little bit. Alan Scott and Don Matthews are probably the oldest bulldog guys alive today. I think they both said they started like in the late 60s with dogs when they were kids. they they don't talk a whole lot about stuff because, which I don't blame them, because anytime you talk about anything in this breed, you always piss somebody off. And then they start talking bad about you and saying things. But recently, I say that because recently there was a comment Alan made. I forget what the post was. Somebody sent it to me. It was so interesting. And it was about that this dog, Mac the Masher, was bred to this female. I think her call name was Patsy. But she was a dog Johnson had. And Alan Scott says, I saw all the dogs as adults out of that litter. And they were all solid brindle. And this Patsy was gray brindle. And some of the dogs, some of the other females in there, I think he said his friend had a sister or something that was black brindle. And he said it was all colored, which is a controversy to some people in the breed. They're like, oh, they shouldn't have a lot of color. They need to be white. Well, Mac the Masher had a brindle bodysuit. From his neck up, he was white-headed, and he had white paws. Other than that, he had just a brindle body. So he was bred, evidently. Alan posted that this Patsy was a solid gray brindle female. And there's no picture. Johnson never had a picture of her. Well, it produced another dog in the Johnson line that was pretty much the foundation dog, a dog called Johnson Sandman the Great. And he was a white dog, pied dog with little brindle patches on his back. So his mother was a solid gray brindle, which, like I said, they pop up all the time. There's almost every line of American Bulldogs goes back to some solid, a red dog, a solid brindle dog. So it's just that I don't know if it just was a preference to have what they call pied ball, which is basically a dog who has a gene in his coat pattern that blocks out the pigment. So if you have a pied dog, it'll be white with the patches of color, a patch on his face. Or if they call it extreme pied, that means that they barely have any color. They may have a freckle on their ear. And that just means that genetically something blocks out all the pigment in the hair follicle and on their skin. Not all the color in their skin. Usually they have some pigment spots still, but there should. And that's a lot of reason why a lot of breeds like boxers and Great Danes and all kinds of dogs, they put it in their standard. You should never breed a pied to a pied or a merle to a pied dog. In Great Danes, I believe, if you have a Harlequin Great Dane, you're never supposed to breed it to another Harlequin because so much of the pigment gets blocked out. If it gets blocked out on their ear canal, they're deaf. And if enough of the pigment in the eye gets blocked out, they'll have blue eyes, but if they get too much blocked out, they'll be blind. So like white boxers, they started having trouble. That's why they would tell people never breed a white boxer. But, you can breed them. You just need to breed them to a dog with pigmentation with more color. And it's going to get like that with American Bulldogs. It's more than people admit. I know there's a line of really nice standard dogs that has had trouble with that, more so than other people's, and they're almost all pied. They have a little bit of color. It's just a spot on their back or a patch on their eye. So there's a place for the heavy pigmented dogs. But that was an interesting piece of history, and it just came out 30 years after I started messing with this breed. Within the last 6 months, here's a nugget that comes out from Alan Scott. History that if he never mentioned it, nobody would have known. So history is a weird thing, man. It's political. It has whoever is the victor writes the history, right? Whoever's alive.
History, his story.
Yeah. So it's like there's a truth and then there's a history.
So in your opinion, then, would you say that the living proof is what defined the American Bulldog, or the political history? that define the American Bulldog? What do you think had more pull over the years?
You know, the thing with American Bulldogs that's unique, and I kind of love it, and sometimes I hate it, is there's a huge variance in type. And it's not a narrow breed. Like it's not like you look at a Doberman and anybody can spot that. But in an American Bulldog, you can have a dog that's 26 inches, has a 4-inch muzzle, is all white, and looks poundy-ish. And then you can have 100% American Bulldog that is 21 inches tall, almost as wide as it is tall, has a 1-inch muzzle, and has so many English Bulldog traits, it's ridiculous. And it's the same breed. So, and you can name combinations in between of all types. So, and even in the beginning, you know, Mac the Masher, the difference between Mac the Masher and the other kind of foundation dog, Dick the Bruiser, is quite a bit. Dick the Bruiser was almost all white. He had just a little bit of red on him. So he was pretty much an extreme pie, whereas Mac is what I would call a bodysuit. Mac had a probably 2.5-inch muzzle, a very blocky square muzzle, and a very blocky head. I think he was a little bit bigger dog, but he was probably, I would say, 90 pounds, I'd guess, in his prime. Whereas Dick the Bruiser was a chunkier, rounder headed dog with more of an undershot, a little bit shorter muzzle, and he was probably 75 pounds. They used to call him Tiny. So Tiny is not going to be a 100-pound dog. And plus you can see even from his offspring, he didn't throw giant dogs. So they're very different dogs, I mean, within the same breed. And they were, at the time, kind of the pinnacle. You know, I think Alan Scott has praised how great of a dog Dick the Bruiser was, and how he was a good catch dog. And same with Johnson used to say how good Mac the Masher was. So it wasn't like they disagreed on those two dogs. They agreed on them, and they both used the dogs extensively. That's kind of what was the resurgence of the breed. Those two were the foundation dogs. So it's funny, though, how things crisscross. Dick the Bruiser produced a dog called Scott's Dixie Man. Alan Scott produced him off of Dick the Bruiser. And that was, I believe, early on, Scott's foundation love of his life. And Mac the Masher produced Sandman the Great, which was Johnson's dog that he loved that dog. Now, that dog was bred to something and produced this big, huge dog he called King Kong. King Kong was Johnson's direction. He wanted the biggest, baddest bulldog he could get. And you don't even have to talk to Johnson. You could look at his pedigree and see how he bred. Everything was slightly line bred off of that dog. King Kong bred to this, King Kong bred to that. So each other's dogs. And then Alan Scott got out of the breed for a little while after Dixie Man died. And he sold a bunch of dogs off to a guy in Illinois called Joe Painter. And Joe Painter's brother-in-law was a guy called Mike Margentina. And supposedly they bought almost everything Alan had and went through them and bred him a certain way. And of course, there was always rumor, I don't know what was true and what's not true, that they fought the dogs and tested them for gameness, and they say they got in trouble for it and went to prison for a little while, maybe. I don't know the full story. I don't know what's true or not. But so if you study the Painter dogs, which was another, in the 80s, they kind of put together a lot of dogs that went into a lot of the people that started, the breed, started really breeding them. Well, there was Casey Cordier and his wife Sheila. I believe they originally were Well, I know they originally were into the pit bulls, UKC pit bulls. They were UKC judges, and he was heavy into the UKC pits, and he had that watchdog strain. Well, in the 80s, he got into the American Bulldogs because Painter dogs, Painter and Argentina were breeding dogs and claiming these are very game dogs, which they are. They were. I mean, they're not a pit bull, but they in many cases can be very game also. So Casey got into the dogs. He bought several dogs from Joe Painter. And basically those dogs were this dog called Sergeant Rock. Sergeant Rock was from a female called Ma Bell, bred to Wright's Rounder, which was from Alan Scott's. That Rounder, I believe, is or Wright. The last name, I guess, is his name. Wright was Alan Scott's cousin. So this dog, Sergeant Rock, I guess, I don't know if they produced it or if they bought him from Alan, but he was evidently the dog they really were impressed with. So they line bred a lot of stuff off of him and really tried to produce a game bred type American Bulldog. And at that time, when the breed started, Johnson and Scott came up with the name of American Pit Bulldog. Not American Pit Bull Terrier, but American Pit Bulldog. So once Joe Painter, they got into it and started, I guess it was early 80s. They used to have this magazine called ARF Cowdog Magazine, because by that time, Johnson switched over to this Animal Research Foundation, ARF, and they were kind of out of Texas, and they were kind of a registry that registered working dogs, mainly like Catahoulas and Australian cattle dogs and stuff like that. And they would register pit bulls too, but so they registered the American Pit Bulldog. And after so much time, Joe Painter said, why don't we drop the pit? Because it's too confusing for people. They hear pit and they just think Pit Bull Terrier. So they dropped the pit, and that's how it became the American Bulldog. Well, Casey had gotten dogs from Painter, and I guess because Painter was breeding them like a pit bull breeder would, tight. He bred Sergeant Rock to his daughters. He bred Sergeant Rock to his mother. He bred Sergeant Rock every which way but loose. And when you get, they weren't pit bulls. I mean, they weren't pure pit bulls. They were a country bulldog that had been around for a long time. And really, the start of this breed is Mr. Johnson and Alan Scott finding the best dogs they could. But like Mr. Johnson said, after the war, they were harder to find because people were not all, it wasn't all agriculture. People moved into the city. So there wasn't the need for the dog as much, just by hog hunters and guys that like big white bulldogs they could have in their pickup truck. So they searched high and low for dogs. Well, they came up with Mac the Masher and Dick the Bruiser and a handful of females, and there were some other guys. There was a guy, Bailey, Tate. There's probably a lot of other stuff that. And I used to hear Mr. Johnson say, "Oh, that gigantic Jim. He was a dog that was around back then." He said he's just a big Great Dane mix. They just like breeders today. They talk shit about each other. I never heard Alan Scott talk shit about anybody. I'll have to say that he's pretty much a gentleman. I've never heard him say a bad word about anybody.
Yeah, I wanted to get an interview with him. A friend of mine talks to him a bunch, and he just wasn't interested. I don't know, probably personal
I don't think
reasons.
like I said, that little bit of information that just came out, which that Sandman the Great's mother was a solid brindle dog. That was just something, and I saw that he said it, I read it, and then all of a sudden here comes the assholes that are going to give him trouble. And that's why I don't think he does. He won't do that. He won't. There's so much stuff that he probably knows.
That makes sense.
And I'm a different kind of person. I'm older now and I'm better than I used to be. But I used to just talk and talk and talk. And I don't care if somebody's pissed off at me. So what? I don't give a shit. It's not the end of the world. I don't really care. But there's a lot of people that they're sensitive. They're more of a gentleman than me. And
sure.
I think that's how Alan Scott is. I don't think he, like I said, I don't talk to him a lot. I'm not saying I know him that well. I've talked to him over the years, but I've never heard him say anything about Johnson, about anybody. So, right. And the other guy that's been around a long time is his friend, Don Matthews. And he's kind of the same way. I've never heard him badmouth anybody. So,
right.
The two oldest historians we have of the breed, they know what's up. They could probably give a lot of information, and they probably won't talk to me because I got a big mouth, and I'm just not the kind of person that tries to. I don't try to hurt people. I won't try to hurt anybody. But to me, if it's true, and that's the history, that's it.
It should be stated.
I just want to know the truth.
It should
I
be
don't
stated.
want to hurt anybody.
No, and you shouldn't. And and nobody should feel any kind of way about that. History. I mean, what I've said forever, on this channel is I just want the next generation to have the information that the previous did not. I want it to be legit. If it's for real, say it. My first two interviews were between two guys who had differing stories, but still I wanted them both on. But it goes back to what you were saying as far as being political in some sense.
Yeah, and I don't blame them. Some people just don't want to live life. I'm kind of like that now that I'm older. I don't want to argue with people. I don't want to fight about stuff. People are saying horrible shit about me, that I'm all kinds of horrible stuff. Yeah. I really get upset about it now. I'm just like, I don't even want to hear it. I don't. You're always going to
be. You're always going to be the bad guy in somebody's story. It's just the way it goes. Even if you're the most. I mean, look at Jesus himself. He was the bad guy in somebody's story, and come on, you know what I mean? You're always going to be the bad guy in somebody's story.
15 years ago, I was like. These people got it all wrong. I didn't do that. I'm not. That's not me. So I'd argue with them, and you know what? It doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter. The more you talk to some of these fools, the worse it gets. The more you look like you're guilty. So
sure.
I understand. They're probably a lot smarter than me, but I like to discuss history. I like to discuss the breed. Some people.
Well,
who gives a shit what the dogs are?
But you discuss it from a humble disposition, and you're not like if I when I'm talking to somebody that thinks they have all the answers, that's when I question them. So it's like, you're coming from a humble disposition, and I think you have the same goal in mind that I do, and that is to just recognize the history for what it is, because people want to know where these dogs came from. And the American Bulldog is probably one of the most controversial topics upon where it came from. Well, what did it come from? But like you said earlier, based on its very loose standard now, you could tell it came from a bunch of places. And
there's a lot I understand and a lot I don't understand. That's what I'd love to know. For 30 years, I've been going over it and over it. I meet people. I find little clues and stuff. And like I said, just, 4, 5, 6 months ago, Alan Scott posted this thing. I don't know why. Out of the blue. I don't know what the discussion even was about. And he said, Sam and the Great's mother, Patsy, I think her name was Patsy. She's solid gray brindle. I'm like, whoa, that is like, because there's so many people with Johnson and bully dogs that are like, Johnson, this and that, blah, blah, blah. There never was such a thing as a heavy colored American Bulldog. Even when you show them pictures, documentation, they don't want to hear it.
Sure.
So it's interesting. I would just love to know some of the makeup. We'll never know everything. I'd like to know some of the makeup. I'd also love to know exactly how the dogs were used and kept, everything, any little detail.
Right.
There is a lot of that stuff out there, not just of American Bulldogs, but of old timers that talk about just the general bulldog. Like there's an interview, there's two different interviews for, well, there's one for Alapahaws, the other one, I think it's for White English. There's a gal and her husband that are pretty good historians. I can't remember their name. Heather is her name. But anyway, they interviewed their grandpa or great grandpa or something, and he's just a guy that had a bulldog from time to time, and people that he knew had these bulldogs from time to time. But they all said the same thing. The dogs were smart. You didn't have to, spend time training them. They got along with the kids. They could go in the woods and catch cattle, catch wild boar, catch wild cattle, come home and play with the kids. They had a lot of sense to them. You could sick them on a dog. You could sick them on a possum or raccoon, whatever you needed them to. They could even be taught to let go, which freaks me out because I haven't seen too many American Bulldogs you could call off when they're catching. I had a dog go ballistic when I first moved out to the country. He was like 2 or 3 years old, but he was weird with me. Like he would stare at me like, "Oh, what do you want me to do, dude? What am I doing? What do you want me to do?" And I got 3 goats that one of them was kind of mean. Mm-hmm. She was going to go to pet butt him, and he caught her, grabbed the horn, and was just yanking her off her feet. And which I didn't mind because Ginger, she was just an evil thing. And so by the time I got there, she was a pygmy goat too. She wasn't a big goat. I grabbed her horn and I said, "Bull, let go. Bull, get." And I kind of waving my foot at his head, and then he's like blinking his eye and he's like, "Oh, okay." He spits the thing out and let go. But most of them, I don't know if they could be trained.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is just for me, not the followers. Okay, if you kept goats, did you keep them for goat's milk? Did you keep them for meat? What was the, just from a survivalist aspect, I want to know, why do people keep goats? I'm still at the beginning stages.
I really like goats, I'll tell you that. I've had several, but when I first got these goats, I had just moved to this place, and I started putting up fencing, and I bought this 7 acres or something. I forget how many acres I have, but it was like, it's the top of an Ozark mountain, basically, and it's kind of hilly, and there's giant oak trees every 5 inches, it seems like. Well, there was a storm that came through there years before, and it knocked a bunch of trees down. So I had a big yard up front that had a mountain of these root ball tree stumps and all over the place. There's no grass. It was all weeds and thicket growing up. And so I had an area and I fenced it off, and I was going to finish that with my first really nice yard. I was going to finish off really big for the dogs. And, but it was tough. So I had a friend that said, "Hey, I have this lady that has these 3 pygmy goats. They're older and she wants to get rid of them. You want them?" And I said, "Well, what do I do with them?" She goes, "They can clear all that brush for you." And sure enough, I got those 3 goats, and they're kind of funny. And they would run up and down those root balls, and they ate everything down to nothing. It was cleared. That winter, I burnt all those, that pile of root balls and stumps. And that's a big yard on the side of my driveway that I have dogs in now. So they helped me kind of do that, going all the way back on my property. Every time I'd build a big pen or big yard for my dogs, I'd throw them goats in there for a couple weeks, and everything would be cut down to nothing.
I just wanted to know because I didn't know, I didn't know what they were actually used for. But let me backtrack just a little bit. Way back in the conversation, you were talking about, Mac the Master, Dick the Bruiser, all these dogs. In your experience, whether you owned it or somebody else owned it, what was your all-time favorite American Bulldog you've ever seen?
I don't, I've had a lot of dogs, man, and I've judged dog shows all over the world. I don't anymore. I used to judge by a dog show a year, and so I put my hands on I don't know, thousands of American Bulldogs. I mean, I could say some of my favorite dogs that I've had, but that's just, my heart, what I love. They're not always the best dog or anything like that. So I don't know. I can't even answer a question like that.
Okay, no, that's cool. The other one.
That's a part of the thing that makes a breeder thirsty is I'm never satisfied. I mean, that's why I'm still doing this. Like I said, I've had a lot of dogs that I love. I know I'd mention a dog and I'd piss off a whole bunch of people, or just certain people that are assholes anyway. But
yeah,
I had a dog named Jack that I loved. I loved him. He was game.
Say his name again.
His name was actually Jaqc, Jack. Okay. I just called him Jack. I didn't even want to keep him. Well, I was getting divorced. I moved out to the country. I had my friend whelp this litter for me. I paid her to whelp this litter, and the dog had 10 puppies, and I used to take deposits. And I had all these people wanting dogs off that dog. I said, go ballistic. He was a real muscular, short, extreme bully dog. Back then I bred pretty extreme bully dogs. And anyway, I bred him this big hybrid female I had called Jasmine, and it produced 10 puppies. And there was a big male in there. I called him Bulljestic. He had a little short pump handle tail, and he was just a big, thick, bully, good-looking pup. And then there was this runt. What do you want to runt? But he was the smallest male, called Jack. And Jack was smaller than, and there's a bunch of big males in there. He was small, but from 4 weeks old, 3 weeks old, you could see he had muscle definition. And the kids, my friend Cindy's kids, they were there every day with the puppies and raising them, and they named him Jack because they said he was a little cracker Jack, because he was the tyrant. He would beat everybody up. He was the boss. And you said he was the smallest male. Yeah, he was smaller. He was very different in type too. He didn't have a bully muzzle. He had a kind of like a standard type muzzle, so it tapered. It wasn't real long, but it looked totally different. And he had a broad front end like his dad and a thick rear end, but he was way more muscular more defined even than his dad. His dad was pretty muscular. And so I kept Bulljestic, who I thought was going to be the pick of the litter, the big dog. And I sold all the bullier dogs out of that litter because I had deposits waiting on pups. And I had 2 females in that litter that were, other people would say they're uglier. They had a little more of a standard type head. But they were really well structured and moved beautiful. So I thought, you know what, I'll keep these girls, because I have this idea of breeding Go Ballistic to his daughter, because Go Ballistic was a good dog, but he wasn't the greatest dog or anything. Sure. He had faults. He had things I didn't like, but I bred him, and every time I bred him, I was way more impressed than I ever dreamed I would be from what came out of it. I could breed him if I bred him to a female as bully as him, the only fault I'd give him is he would improve structure, he'd improve everything, hips, but if the female was bully, the pups a lot of times would be too bully. Instead of having a 2-inch muzzle, they'd have an inch and 3/4. They'd have crazy muscle, but they'd be too extreme. For me, they were too extreme. Everybody else, I bred him to this female I had called Bouncin' Betty, and Go Ballistic to Bouncin' Betty turned out to be a click for those super bully people. Mm-hmm. And I kept a dog called Full Monty, and he was a great dog too, but his brother went to these people in Germany, and another brother went to the UK. This dog Thor, and what was the other dog? The dog that went to Germany's name? Oh, Goliath, King Goliath. And then there was a female that went to a guy in Texas called Gabby Gal. Well, they were ripped. Like, their muscle was freaky. They were better than their dad, Go Ballistic. Go Ballistic, like I said, he was a good dog, but he wasn't the greatest or anything like that. He wasn't very big for me, you know, and he had great traits here and there, but overall, he wasn't like, oh my gosh, he's my dream dog. But he was a crazy, like, he was a best stud. If I bred him to a really big female that had a medium-sized muzzle, he would throw perfect, what I would call perfect bulliness. He'd throw great structure. He'd improve everything.
Sure.
So it's weird. You get that. It's rare. You don't get it a whole lot, but you'll get a dog that is, you know, a super stud. Like, he can be bred to a beagle and make a nice dog, you know. So Go Ballistic produced Jack, and Jack was one of my favorite dogs. I wish I would have bred on him a lot more. I didn't breed him as much because he didn't have a bully muzzle, and at the time, I was all caught up in this bully Johnson-y type, machine type dogs that I had been producing. I had a little bit of a reputation for producing, and I just didn't want to lose that type. But nowadays, I'm like, and I didn't realize, I didn't have the breeding experience to know what I could do, where I could push limits. Now I do, and now I've gone way past. I've bred tons of standard stuff. I almost pride myself on how little Johnson is in my dogs, and I still can produce a bully dog. But my goal should change to better breathing and performance. But this dog, Jack, he didn't have patience for puppies. He didn't have patience for a bitchy female. He never hurt a puppy. Of course, I would never let him, but he'd hurt a female. Like, if he put him with a female and if she decided to want to try to fight him over food or something, he did some crazy stuff I don't want to mention, but he was just a hell of a bulldog and super wonderful dog. Like a dog, he grew up at a time when I was working almost like 2 jobs, and then every second I had that I was off, I was trying to make this place I bought into not a crazy, you know, overgrown forest, you know, and I put up fences and just doing a million things. So I didn't have time to socialize or do anything. And I used to take him at 2 years old. He'd only been on a leash once, maybe twice. And I was dating a girl that wanted to go here in St. Louis. We have this dog parade, the Mardi Gras in Soulard in St. Louis. I had never been to it. I'd never even heard of it. So she said, oh, can we take one of your dogs and go? So I thought it was just a little thing, you know. I get there with Jack, and I mean, I'm in the middle of downtown St. Louis. There is thousands and thousands of people. Every sidewalk is overflowing, and there's dogs every 10 feet. And when I mean there's dogs, there may be a Maltese in a clown outfit, or there might be a pit bull dressed like, you know, in a costume, and everything in between. And everybody's coming up with their dogs, and I'm like, oh my God, this was a bad idea. Because Jack will take about 10 seconds of anything from another dog. And the dog grew up in the woods. He never been anywhere. And I never trained him to walk on a leash. He did fantastic.
Wow.
I mean, he was more focused on me and my girlfriend or any people that wanted to give him attention. Yeah. So he never went after a dog because he didn't care. He was in heaven. Just little kids all over him. And he just loved that. You know, that was just... But I watch him every second because
of course.
I don't need, you know, an incident.
Well, let me ask you this. This kind of branches into 2 questions. The reasons you would rather have an American Bulldog than a Pit Bull, and the other question is more or less: have you ever experimented? Have you ever thrown a Pit Bull bitch to one of your American Bulldog males to see what would happen?
What a loaded question, because I am like I have this mythology connected with me, because it's not true, but of being a dog paper hanger. I'm the most paper hung guy on earth, and there's all kinds of stuff. One of my ex best friends who stabbed me in the back a million times had a very famous dog from me and had frozen semen, and all of a sudden now he's thawed this frozen semen out and sent it to Embark, and the dog came back because people and people that know me and people in American Bulldogs, some new people probably don't know any of this stuff, but there had been rumors that, well, first the rumor was, and actually some of it didn't start with Jack, but some of it went around from Jack, because Jack, like I said, he had a Go Ballistic's body, he was a short 22 and a half inch dog, and he was a little longer body than Go Ballistic, his dad, but he had a totally different head. His skull was the same, but his muzzle was tapered more like a Scott dog. Mm-hmm. But he didn't have a really long muzzle, but it tapered to a point. Mm-hmm. So that's a weird combination, I guess, in the dogs. And I love the dog. I love the dog, not because of the way his muzzle looked, but because, and he's just a freak. He was a freak temperament-wise, and he was a freak physically. Like, his hips were great, he had great elbows, and he had probably the most slabby, insane freaking muscle. Like, he had gutters going down his back. His back legs, his muscles in his back legs were so big that his testicles popped out single file from the back.
Shit.
His shoulders, he had a little too wide of a front end, like Go Ballistic, and it looked like he had cantaloupes on both sides of his shoulders. His neck was so thick that, like, you had to have a choke collar on him, because if you got a leather collar that would fit around the base or middle of his neck, it would slide up over his head because it tapered up. Mm-hmm. So, and he, like I said, there's people that witnessed and know that he was a game son of a gun. Like, he did some shit. He was tough, and you pull up his lips, and it was amazing. I used to pull his lips up and just look at his mouth all the time, because that's a big fault in American Bulldogs. There's a lot of, and I think it comes from the English Bulldog blood, there's a lot of Standard and Johnson type bully dogs that they got tiny teeth. And as they get older, their gums swell, and then their small teeth look like just little white dots.
Sure.
And then canines aren't that big, and they're just not very good, impressive teeth. Well, Jack had teeth like a freaking timber wolf. Like, and he wasn't missing a tooth. And, he didn't have the longest muzzle, but it was full. Like, his teeth, his detonation, he was undershot. He wasn't scissor bit. So he was undershot, but he had these great teeth. So there was a guy out in Arizona who kind of had a similar goal to me of producing performance type, bully type American Bulldog. And I actually coined this expression, and it kind of mimics what, I don't know if there was a guy called Larry Cora, or if it was Joe Painter, or if it was Steve Leclerc that coined the term performance standard American Bulldog. So what that meant was it distinguished them from just a standard dog. They wanted you to know that their dogs were a performance dog. They even had a registry at one time called the Game Bred American Bulldog Registry. So I coined this thing, performance bully type American Bulldog, which has never been. It's just something I made up that mimicked what they said. But what it was to stand for was a functional Johnson or bully type dog, a dog that can breathe well enough to go in the woods, catch a wild boar, hold it while it gets killed, load up in the truck, and do it again 4 or 5 times in a day, just like the breed's supposed to do. So this guy in Arizona, he kind of had the same goal. And he was friends with a guy that I was friends with for years locally here that is one of the older American Bulldog breeders of Johnson Bully type dogs. And so he knew all about my dogs. He came to a show here and came to my house. And matter of fact, he messed with Jack, and probably Jack was his favorite dog that I had. So I don't go to shows. I quit showing after the first 4 or 5 years that I showed dogs in American
Well,
Bulldogs.
wait, can I cut you off there just for 1 second?
Sure.
So Jack was a people-friendly dog?
Yes. Like,
okay.
I never did bite work with him, and I'm not sure he would do. I don't know if he would get aggressive towards people. Like, he just loved the shit out of people. He could. My friend brought him to a show that we had here in St. Louis. I didn't want him to come because I didn't want to mess with him, you know. And my friend's like, "No, I'll show him. I want to show something. I'll bring him." So he takes him to the show, and I said, "You got to watch him, man, because if a dog looks at him the wrong way or something, there could be an incident. He's got a bite that is hard, man. Like he'll cut through. He'll break a bone. He's done it." So here my friend Stacy has the dog. He's walking him all over the place. He went and showed him, and I look over from time to time. It's like there's 6-8 kids on top of him, and he's loving it. He's in his element. And I kept telling him, dude, watch that dog, because I'm telling you, if the wrong dog with the wrong attitude comes up, it's on. And you know, I don't have a breaking stick on me. This would be bad. So the dog loved it. And it shocked me. He actually entered him in the show. And this guy, I'm about to tell you, this guy in Arizona, who he and I had the same goals. And he achieved it, I think, with his dogs too. They weren't proven as much because he died actually. But I don't know if it was, I know it was jealousy. But him and this other guy, the other guy had bred to Jack, my dog Jack, and produced this really nice female that championed out in 10 seconds called Morticia. Like Jack, Morticia was very muscular, beautiful dog, and this guy was a big breeder. He had like probably 30 dogs, probably had 25 females, and on his property he had all these little pens. They're all lined up together, so when you walk down to look at his dogs, it's just a row of dogs side by side, 8 to 10 foot apart from each other. And it got to the point, I know for a fact, that he would hide that female because everybody would walk down, and all his dogs are beautiful, don't get me wrong. He's noted for having beautiful dogs. But when they compared her next to this female Morticia, who championed out, like I said, in 10 seconds, because she was just ripped like Jack, really sinewy, and just had a cool, muscular look to her. People would say, "Oh, I want to pop off of her." And he bred her. He claims he bred her one time, and he had sold pups at that time for like $2,000, $2,500 a piece, which is quite a bit for American Bulldogs, 15 years ago.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, he's like, would hide her in his basement when people would come over to look, and then he had deposits on a second litter, and then he says that she died. She overheated and died, which is possible, but I don't think so, because there's a lot of other things. I hate to get into all that nonsense, but there's other things genetically that pen hip scores. You don't have a line of dogs that pen hip in the 5s and the 6s, and then all of a sudden you got dogs that pen hip in the 3s and like 41, which is Jack's pen hip. So there's just a lot, and then just the look. You could see there was a big difference after that. A lot of his dogs had similarity to Jack, which was weird. Like my dog Go Ballistic was such a strong stud. My dog Jack was like that too. Like, not that he had a good head, he had an ugly muzzle on him, but you seem to see it even sometimes 4 generations away from him. So
is that what you're working with on your yard today? Is a lot of his blood?
Unfortunately, no. I do have one or two dogs that, there's several shots of them in there. But Jack was a problem because like his a dog that I bred off a real heavy too was his half brother and his nephew. So I took Jack's sister, a female called Bellissima. Remember, I told you I had that litter, and I sold pretty much I filled all my deposits, people that bought the bully. Well, there was two females and they weren't as typey, but they had just incredible, beautiful structured bodies. And since Go Ballistic was such a good stud, I'd always thought, toying with me, maybe I'll see what inbreeding would be, but I wouldn't want to inbreed him to a real bully dog, because any bully dog I bred him to, he produced great dogs, but they had like 1 to 1.5, 2 inch muzzles, too extreme.
Sure.
And I hated that. And
so
I thought, what would it be like if I bred him to what he lacked, but his daughter? And matter of fact, it started a whole thing. Like I said, this was 20 something years ago. And back in that time, there were message boards. There was no Facebook wasn't a thing, I don't think. You'd have the American Bulldog board, the Johnson American Bulldog board, the Bully type American Bulldog board. There was there was a board called the Boulevard that my friend Jose at Manstoppers started. And that was where everybody went that had big, extreme bully dogs. And I thought, I posted my thought on this breeding of taking Go Ballistic to his daughter, but not a typey bully daughter, to a daughter that has everything I think he lacks, which and is 180 degrees, little different type, which is what that Bellissima was. She was what some people call hybrid, which just means that you bred a bully dog to a Scott dog or a standard dog, and it favored the standard side, or they call it hybrid, standard hybrid. So it means it's standard in type, but its bloodline is half more the bully and half the standard. So
sure.
I was like, I'm going to do this breeding. Their types are a little opposite. Her type is an improvement over his in function type, and then it's him bred to his daughter. So, oh my God, these bully people who, their whole goal is freaks, to produce giant-headed freaks. They're like, you're insane. They're all like, you're an idiot. Why would you do that? You're never gonna stop getting those long muzzles. All kinds of weird stuff. And then I had people, even my friend Jose was like, dude, what are you talking about? Because I said it's never been done before. And they're like, what are you talking about? That's hybrid. That's a hybrid. You breed a Scott type or standard type to a Johnson bully or classic type. And I said, yeah, that's the type, the phenotype. You're correct. It's two little different, but it's not a hybrid because it's him inbred to his daughter. So anyway, I did that breeding, and it produced a very interesting litter. And there was a pup in there that I sold to a guy, and he called it BMJ. BMJ turned out to be an excellent dog, kind of a pivotal dog, kind of clean, really clean structure, superior movement, and he was hell on wheels. Like, he was the cockiest dog on earth. Like, he'd go into the show ring, and if he didn't go after another dog, he just looked like a peacock. He was bristled with, just thought he was the cockiest thing on earth. And he, for a while there, was like, I'm not positive, but I think he was like one of the winningest bully dogs in the show ring. I think he had like 12 or 13 best in shows. He was a dual champion, or I can't even remember now. Was he a grand champion? Maybe he was a dual grand champion or something like that. Anyway, I was the only person that was really excited about him, mainly. Even the guy who ended up with him, who wasn't the original guy who bought him, we became friends. I thought he was a good friend. And at one time when he was like 11 months old, he gave him back to me because he thought the dog was too hybrid. Like he wasn't going to ever be a real bully dog. And at that time, the guy was interested in being a big show dog guy because he went to a lot of shows. And he wanted the more classic, typey, bully type American Bulldog. Well, anyway, I was thrilled to get him back because I had his brother, who was my pick of the litter, a dog I kept called Bulljack. And Bulljack was slightly smaller, but he was a bullier dog than BMJ. He had those crazy teeth like his Uncle Jack, and his prey drive was insane. And I only had him till he was 5 months old. I had already pen hipped him. He was in the 3s, so he had excellent hips. And I had the friend of mine I'm telling you that I fell out with, he called and said, hey, there's this guy in town from Canada. He's here, he works for Bosch and Loam, and he's here on a seminar, and he's looking for a stud for his female. He came over here and he insulted me and told me my dogs aren't good, they don't work, and they wouldn't work, and they won't work out. He said, so put him in the pen with your dog Shrek. I had this dog Shrek. He was an inbred Broadzilla son, and he was a big, like 110-pound dog. He wasn't mean or anything, but he was just like high drive. And for some reason, if a guy got in his yard with him, a strange guy, and I don't know, if the guy had a certain energy or something, he would get real hyper, super hyper, and then he'd just start grabbing the guy's shoulder, his leg, not grabbing the leg, but like grabbing his pant leg, and he real fast, like just yanking on him. And a couple guys he brought to the ground, and I don't think he would have really done anything to him, but it scares the shit out of people.
Sure.
So this guy said, put him in the pen with Shrek, which I wasn't going to do. So he comes over, the guy calls, he comes over. It's kind of an icy cold day. We walk down to my dogs. I show him Shrek, and Shrek's giving him a show. And he's impressed with Shrek, but then he keeps looking over at my puppy, Bulljack. Bulljack's in a pen with 2 other pups that are like 5 months, and one was like 7 months old. And my cat came down, and this dog is flipping out, and he's staring at the cat and jumping, vertically over these other 2 dogs, just doing crazy stuff. And he goes, man, I like that dog. Let's see what he'll do. And I'm like, oh, he's my puppy I'm keeping. He's not for sale. He goes, oh no, let me I got a towel in the car. Let's see if he'll do some bite work. So we pulled him out and put him on a leash, and never done anything with the dog. I did a little bit of like flirt pole stuff with him once or twice, and it turned him on instantly. Like he was just lost his mind. So now he lives for it. And so we get him out, and this dog full mouth bites this towel, and he's like helicoptering my puppy, which if I'd have known what I know now back then, I would have said, hey, let's not do that. You don't want to do that with a puppy. But back then, every Sunday we'd meet at this place here in town called the Tom Rose School. It's a school for training trainers. And we'd work our dogs. You'd pay $40, and there'd be a decoy there, and you could do stuff. And well, this guy that was here from Canada, he was one of the best decoys I've ever seen. And he had Malinois, he had American Bulldogs too. Well, he's like, can you bring him Sunday? Because he was already going to go to that thing on Sunday to see everybody's dogs. I'm like, yeah, I'll bring him. So I bring him there, and he really works him, puts on a sleeve, does stuff, and does all this testing, and tries to get him to let go and back down, and covers his head with a rag and pinches his balls, does everything he can to get the dog. And he never did. The dog just wanted to, that's all he lived for, is to bite stuff and prey drive. So then that guy talked me out of the dog and said, I'll buy him, I'll give you a semen on him, I'll send you puppies, whatever. And I'm like, no, he's my dog, I want to keep him. He goes, you got his mom and dad, you could do the breeding you can, blah, blah, blah. And a bunch of people at the club said, you're dumb, this guy could put this guy was promising, I could put a French ring sport title, I could do this, I could do that, blah, blah, blah. And I kept saying, no. So I got home, I started thinking about it. I thought, maybe I'm just stupid. this guy is all excited for this dog, and he's titled other dogs and schutzen and all kinds of stuff. So I'd be stupid. So I did the deal. And of course, long story short, he screwed me. He screwed me out of the dog. He ended up selling the dog as a personal protection dog like 2 or 3 times. I learned later that the guy does that a lot. So anyway, I got BMJ back, and I was happy because I lost Bulljack to this dude. And I was so excited to breed this dog because he wasn't fully mature. He was only like 11 months old. And I know how my dogs are. My dogs don't mature like regular Johnson dogs. I've done outcrosses to Man of War blood, and I've done outcrosses to this Heinz Scott type female. And so my dogs are a little different, and I've selected different. And so my dogs grow up kind of skinny. They don't grow up fat and soft and cartilagey. So they're kind of sinewy, skinny looking. Sometimes they look terrible. Sometimes they look like a pointer. They look rangy and thin, but they hit about 9 to 10, 11 months old. They start putting on insane muscle. And sometimes by the time they're 18 months to 2 years of age, they're a totally different dog. Nobody would even believe it's the same dog. Well, that's kind of what happened with BMJ. And I bred that dog when he was, I think, 14 months old. I was so excited to breed him. I bred him. I didn't even think about, I didn't plan the breeding like I normally would and really analyze it. It was like, no, this bitch is in heat. I got to breed BMJ. So I bred him to this black female I had called Monella. Well, that litter produced my dog Huggy, this female Gracie, who's the first black bully champion, a dog called Butters. And it was like the culmination of the best of all that stuff. They're probably a little bit better than BMJ, which makes sense because BMJ was inbred. So that, my dog Jack, I love Jack, and I actually had a dog off of Jack called Joe. He was pretty freaking, as far as a working type dog and a lot of other things, I loved him too. But BMJ would be Jack's half brother and nephew. So I should have probably bred Jack more, and I should have bred Joe more, but it would have been inevitable because I was painting myself into a corner with that stuff. You can't just keep. And some of the game bred dogs, they might keep inbreeding and line breeding tight forever, but you can't do that with American Bulldogs. They're just not. They're not bred as clean as a game bred dog.
Sure.
So that's the thing about. I get asked a lot of questions about line breeding and inbreeding and outcrossing. And when I first started out, of course, I was a big pit bull enthusiast, and I studied pit bull pedigrees. And when you look at game bred pit bulls, they inbreed and line breed, and they don't lavish the outcross, or at least on paper they don't show it. Maybe that's because they don't want to belittle their bloodline. I understand that now. A lot of American Bulldog breeders are like that.
Sure.
Like I said, I have an ex-friend that lied about a lot of stuff when he bred to my dogs and just claimed they were his dogs that were inbred. So there's an ego that always gets everybody in trouble. But now, after all these years and doing so many breedings, I've done a lot of inbreedings, I've done a lot of line breedings, and I've done a lot of outcrosses. And every one of those, it's all the roll of the roulette wheel. Genetics aren't a mathematic equation. It's just the roll of the dice on stuff. The genes pop up a certain way, and the way they pop up is the way they pop up. But outcrossing is probably as important as inbreeding and line breeding. You gotta have a little something in there. And the other weird thing, it's not scientific. I have no scientific information to back any of my idea, but it's just my experience and my gut that I think you get outcrossed to just about anything. And once you get back to 7/8, it doesn't matter. And I often wonder sometimes if the quality of the outcross is that, and like I used to put so much emphasis. I'd buy dogs for an outcross. I'd check their hips. I'd check everything, and their temperament wasn't perfect. I'd just get rid of them. I was like, I'm not going to chance this, But now I'm like, it seems like the benefit of an outcross has more to do with what the core that your blood is. So if you have a fairly line bred or inbred line, the first outcross, some people are like, you're going to get hybrid vigor and all this stuff, which I'm sure you do. But I've never done one that's like, wow, this is the best litter I've ever had. Same thing with inbreeding. I've never inbred and been like, wow, I got a dog that's got everything. There's quality. There's some quality there, here and there, but your inbreedings and your outcrosses aren't the breedings where it's like, here's my superstar. Here's the dog I'm going to breed off of here forever. No, but that inbred dog becomes a better brood bitch or a better stud for your next step. And the outcross dog, it's the one benefit is that it frees up. It's like taking a snow globe, and all those little pieces of snow are the genes. And line bred and inbred dogs, the genes combination is reduced. So all those snowflakes stay on the ground. They may even push closer together. But when you outcross, it's like you're taking that snow globe and you flipping it upside down and shaking the shit out of it, and then flipping it back and letting it settle down. Those genes that have always been there, there's not the genes you're introducing. The ones that have always been there, they express different. Maybe size, or maybe temperament, or maybe athletic ability. Things that have, when you inbreed and line breed, you're canceling out shit. You're canceling out stuff. You're reducing the combinations of genes that can be expressed. That's what inbreeding does. So inbreeding can produce better, and it can also produce the shit genes can be expressed. That's what happens when you concentrate stuff. So when you outcross, you're reshuffling it. It may reshuffle garbage. It may reshuffle genes that have been repressed for 10 generations. You just don't know, but it shakes shit up. And the next step after that, when you go back to your blood again, that's where the benefit is for inbreeding and for outcrossing. Like I said, sometimes I wonder, it'd be cool to have a study. If you took a Chihuahua and bred it to a whatever, and then when you get down to 1/8 Chihuahua and you get down to 7/8 that dog, are you going to have Chihuahuas? No, I doubt it. I doubt you'll get prick ears. You might not get too many traits from the Chihuahua, but it's the reshuffling of the good genetics that you've had that express genes that haven't been expressed in a while. That seems like that's where the benefit is. And man, like I said, it's not scientific.
Sure.
It's like just my gut from my experience. So I'll tell younger people, talk to me about thinking about doing this inbreeding. I might not agree with it. I might, 10, 15 years ago, I'd have been like, you're nuts. I don't do that. But I've seen it too many times where, people do different stuff that I would never do, and then bang, man, something happened. They produce something pretty nice. So I won't discourage anybody, but I try to tell them, look, don't look at this breeding as like I'm going to produce my superstar off of this. You might just get a good dog if you're lucky, but the power is that dog is genetically stacked to throw. If you're crunching on good stuff, to throw that good stuff and to homogenize it and get it more consistent. So you can handle an outcross. Sometimes outcrosses are good too because it frees up your genes so you could line breed or inbreed a little longer and not kill all your genetic diversity.